In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the log shipping. Before we set up the log shipping, we need to know what is log shipping and why do we need it. Let's say this is your database server and it has multiple databases in it. And this is your application server. Your application server connects to the database server to retrieve the data or perform DML operations against the databases it hosts. And this is your primary OLTP database, and it processes thousands of transactions per day. This is a very critical server, a database server for you. So what is your disaster recovery plan? In case you lose this database server, the database server got crashed for some reason and you can't access the database anymore. So how do you continue the business? How do you continue to run the application without any interruption, right? In that scenario, typically you would be setting up secondary database server, or sometimes you call it as a DR server, where you host the databases, whatever the critical databases. For example, you take the full backup and restore the full backup on the secondary database server, and you don't recover it, you just keep it in the no recovery mode. And then you take the full database backup of every database in this primary database server. So you take full backup and restore it on this server, and then set it as a no recovery mode, and then you take the log backup. You take log backup every 15 minutes or 30 minutes. You can set up however way you want it. So you take the log backups and then restore those log backups on this server. So the log shipping is pretty much what it does. It just takes the log backups at specified intervals and then keep restoring the log backups on the secondary database server. So in case you lose this primary database server, you can point your application server to the log shipping server and continue to run the business. Okay, so this is what typically log shipping setup does. And the log shipping is there for last 20-30 years. I remember, the day the SQL Server released, SQL Server 7 or 8, the log shipping is there. It is very old technique of implementing the disaster recovery setup. Still, it is effective. If the data centers are miles apart, then this log shipping works pretty good. If you don't have a storage level replication, the log shipping is great. And there are other DR setups like database mirroring, always on, replication, other than the log shipping. So log shipping is one way of achieving the DR setup. Okay, so this is what the log shipping does. It just takes the log backups from the primary database server and then copy over to the secondary database and then restore the log backups on the secondary database. That way you have all the databases, whatever the important databases on the primary database, have copied over to the secondary database and have the secondary database ready in case there is a disaster. So you call this as a warm standby, because let's say your full backup runs at 12 a.m. and then log backup runs at 1 a.m. and you set up log backup to run every 1 hour. So you have another log backup runs at 2 a.m. So your server got crashed 1:30. All right. So what do? You have the full backup restored here, which is fine. And then your log backup is nothing but changes that happened after the last full backup or last log backup. Okay, in this case, the last full backup. Okay, so it takes the changes from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. and then creates the log backup, and then you copy the log backup on the server and then you restore the log backup. Okay, so you got the changes up until 1 a.m. because you took the 1 a.m. and the server got crashed at 1:30. So you lose the transactions from 1 to 1:30. 30 minutes of transactions, you lost it. So you have to take that risk. If you set up the log backups in the log shipping, you can set up the frequency of the log backups. In this case, I'm saying 1 hour. Typically you would be setting up 15 minutes or 5 minutes, depends on how many transactions you get in the database. Your management has to take a call how many minutes it's okay to lose the transactions. 5 minutes it's okay to lose the transactions. So you can set up log shipping to create log backups every 5 minutes. That is why you call it as a warm standby. The database mirroring always on, they are hot standbys if you set up the secondary server in synchronous mode, because every transaction that you insert in primary will get copied over synchronously to the secondary server, so you don't lose any transactions. So that's why you call them as a hot standby. So this is what the log shipping does. In this demo, I'm going to create two setup. One is, let's say you have a Windows database server, SQL 2017. You have a database here, and then this is your Linux database server. It has SQL 2017. I'm going to set up the log shipping between Windows server and the Linux server. This is one setup I'm going to show you in this demo. The other setup is, you have Linux database server and you have another Linux database server. You are setting up the log shipping between the Linux servers. Okay, this is your database on the primary server, and this is your database on secondary server, and you set up the log shipping between the primary and secondary between the Linux database server. Okay, you got 2017 here, and you got 2017 SQL Server 2017. Okay, this is the second setup I'm going to show you. See, the log shipping, it is not only a disaster recover technique that you use. Sometimes you may want to use the log shipping for migrating databases from one server to other server. For example, you have the SQL Server databases on Windows Server, and you wanted to migrate the databases to the Linux database server. So how do you do it? Of course, you can take database backup and then restore the backup onto the Linux database server and then restore it, right? But you have the transactions that are coming every second. Let's say there are 10 transactions coming every second, right? You cannot simply take a full backup and pass the application and then copy the full backup to the target and then restore it. So that's not going to work, right? You need to quickly fail over the database from Windows server to the Linux database server, and then point your application to the Linux database server. That's it. Okay, within few seconds, or maybe 15 seconds max, you should be able to point your application to the Linux database server and continue to run the application. Okay, so you cannot take minutes or hours of interruption to migrate the database from Windows database server to Linux database server. So how do you achieve in that scenario? Log shipping is one technique where you set up the log shipping between the Windows database server and a Linux database server, and then before you migrate, you just cut the log shipping, stop the application, cut the log shipping, and then make the databases on the Linux database server as read-write mode, and then point your application to the Linux database server. Okay, so within few seconds or maybe a minute or a couple of minutes, you should be able to bring the database on the Linux database server and point your application to Linux. So that way you can migrate the databases. Okay, so it is not only a log shipping, it is also used for some other purposes. I'm going to show you the first method, the first setup between the Windows and the Linux, and the next setup between the Linux servers. Okay, so in my setup, the demo, the Windows server name is so sorry, my handwriting is pretty bad. Let me show you this Windows server. This is my Windows database server. It has the SQL 2017 running, and this is my Linux server, SQL CentOS 1, and I'm going to show you how to set up the log shipping between the Windows server and the Linux server here. Let me show you the first setup in detail, how I'm going to do it. So we're going to set up the log shipping between Windows database server and the Linux database server. In the log shipping, you need the share folder. So there are a couple of ways to set up the log shipping. You need to decide where the share folder is going to be. You can have share folder in this server, and when you set up the log shipping, it will create three jobs: log backup job, and it will run on the source server because it reads the primary database and then create the log backup in the share folder or whichever the folder. Okay, and then you have the copy job, and then you have the restore job. Okay, there are three jobs. You take the log backup, and then you have to copy that log backup to the secondary server, and then you have to restore that log backup on the secondary server. So there are three jobs that gets created when you set up the log shipping. So the log backup, it always runs on primary, and the restore runs on the secondary, and the copy job, it runs on the secondary server. It creates the log backup, and then copy job, it copies the log backup onto the secondary server, and then restore job, it reads the log backup and then restore it on the target database. The log backup job, where you wanted to take the log backup, you wanted to take the log backup locally on the primary database server, or you wanted to take the log backup onto a share folder, right? The share folder can be accessible to Linux database server as well. Typically in Windows scenarios, when you set up the log shipping in Windows environment, you create the log backups and set up the log backup to store the log backups locally. And then you have copy job, which copies to the secondary server, and restore job restores the log backup onto the secondary database. So in my setup, I'm not going to set up the log backup to create the log backup locally. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a SMB share, a Samba share. I will install the Samba server on this Linux database server. So I create the share folder here. When I set up log shipping, I take log backups directly onto the Samba share, the SMB share on this server. So the log backup will be there on this server. When the log backup runs, the backup will be available to the secondary server. I don't need copy job because copy don't need to do anything because the backup is already there on the Linux server, right? So, but log shipping setup is going to create copy job, but I'm going to disable that copy job because it don't need to copy the log backup from somewhere onto the secondary server, because when the log backup runs, it takes the log backup and it copies, it just stores the log backup directly onto the secondary server because I have the Samba share sitting on the secondary server, and then the restore job, which simply takes that log backup and restore it on the secondary server. So that is what I'm going to do. But you can also set up this way. You can create a log backup to store the log backup locally on the primary database server, and then you can set up the copy job. Of course, the copy job will be created. You can have the copy job to copy this backup and then copy it over to the secondary server. Okay, so you can also create that way. That might be more reliable way of doing it, because when you are taking log backup, in your production environment, highly sensitive or too many transactions, a very critical database server, you don't want log backup to fail because the share is missing or it gets broken or some reason. Ideally, you would want to take log backups locally and then let copy job copy the backup to the secondary server and restore that backup. You need to have the setup that way. But in this setup, I haven't created that. What I did, I created SMB share and then I directly take the log backups over to the SMB share. So that's how I'm going to do. What I'm going to do first, I have the Windows database server I have showed you, and I have the Linux database server. I have the database running on both servers. Okay, I don't have the databases, but I have the database instance on both servers running, and I'm going to create the database for this log shipping. And also, I'm going to install the SMB because it is the one that creates the shares. So I'm going to create the SMB server on the secondary database server, and then I'm going to create some shares, and then I'm going to use the shares for the log backups. So this is what it is. In the next setup that I'm going to show you, the log shipping between the Linux servers. Okay, so you have the Linux server here and you have secondary Linux server here. This is primary and this is secondary. And I create the SMB share, the Samba share here. And then this is, and I'm going to create Samba client packages here because when I set up log shipping, the log backup, it creates the log backup locally on this share. That means the file will be residing on this server, the log backup file. So here I install the Samba client, and your copy job, it just copies from the share folder and it copies over the log backup onto the secondary server. Okay, so I'm going to install the second setup, the log shipping second setup between the Linux server I'm talking about. So I'm going to create the Samba client on the secondary server. So in this case, I don't need to create Samba client. All I need to do is just the Samba server on the Linux database server for this setup. Okay, so let's go over the Linux setup. So this is my Windows database, and I have one database here. Let's delete the database. And you can see from here the Linux, this is my Linux server and it is running, and this is my Linux server, SQL CentOS 1, and the IP address is 105.56.105. And let's connect to the Linux server. It doesn't have any database, so let's create a database. Let's take backup of the full backup of the database. And since we are going to take log backups, the database recovery should be in full. So I'm going to take log backup. So these are the backups. I'm just going to copy and paste it on the laptop. So this is the virtual operating system on my laptop. Okay, and this is my laptop hard drive. So I'm going to copy the backups on my local laptop and then copy and then use the FTP to copy the backups onto the Linux database server. So this is my account. Now upload these backups onto the Linux server. Okay, let's create a directory where I can store the backups. Okay, so I have the backups here. Now let's restore the backups on the database server. So this is my Linux server, a SQL CentOS one. So you can verify this way. Okay, so this is your Windows server, and this is your Linux server. This connects to the SQL CentOS one. All right, so let's restore the database. And then you can see that it shows the Windows path. So relocate all of them to the Linux path. And then in the options, you specify no recovery, because if you specify a default with the recovery, it's going to open the database in read-write mode. So that's not the way you set up the log shipping. In the log shipping, the target databases will be in the restoring mode, because it continuously keeps restoring the log backups, right? So first full backup, you have to set it up in the no recovery, and then set up the log shipping in the no recovery mode. Okay, so we restored the full backup, and now let's restore the log backups. Okay, so now we have the database on the Linux server. Now let's create the log shipping. Oh, sorry. Before we create log shipping, before we set up the log shipping, we need to create the SMB share and stuff like that, right? So we have to install the SMB, the Samba share. This is the Samba server. You are going to install the Samba server, and then the Samba client and Samba common. The Samba client is not really required, because this server is not going to access some Samba share, SMB share on a different server. Okay, so but I have just put that client installation package as well. So let's install the Samba server. I probably might have already installed. Let's see. Okay, it has internet connection. Okay, it says it installed the Samba server, and then Samba client, and then the dependency packages Samba common tools. All right, so I just installed the SMB tools. Now we need to create the share folder, right? We need to have a folder and create the share folder on that folder. So let's create the folder. So this is the location where the SQL server is configured by default. So I'm going to create a folder to store the log backups, and this folder should be owned by MS SQL, and you set up the appropriate permissions, and now you have created the folder. So now let's configure the Samba share. So you need to edit the SMB configuration. This is global configuration, and these are some of the shares: homes, printers, and then print. Now we are going to create the share for log shipping. Okay, so let's go through this the share details. The path is, we just created this path. This is the place where we are going to create the share, right? So we just created this folder, and this is available, browsable, public, writable, if, yeah, because the Windows server is going to write the files in the share folder. So you have to set writable, or you can say read only equal to no, which is writable is equal to yes. Okay, so either way you can set up, but I just used writable equal to yes. And then I have set these permissions. Typically Microsoft website says it doesn't say anything about this, but I had hard time setting up the share folder. So I used 777 to create the files and things like that. So I don't want any permission issues, this, that. So I just open up the folder for you to create with a lot of privileges. Okay, so guest equal to OK and force equal to MySQL. Sorry, MSSQL. See, I have set up these two parameters. So in let's go to the SQL Server on Linux. I don't know, somewhere I have seen the log shipping, but I don't know where it is. Okay, anyways, so somewhere you'll see that okay, this is how you set up the SMB share. You need to specify these parameters, but it doesn't specify a lot of things I specified here. Okay, I have copied the options that Microsoft has recommended, but it didn't work for me. So I have to tweak a little bit, add my own stuff here. I have added these parameters, so without which I couldn't make it work for my demo. So what this guest OK and force user equal to MSSQL, what it does is, see, the log backup runs on Windows Server. When it runs on Windows Server, it has to copy the log backups to the share folder. So you don't want to authenticate to the share folder, right? So your share folder, if you see here, you are going to access the share folder by authentication. Security equal to true. Sorry, security equal to user, right? So there is another option called security equal to share, but I couldn't set share folder for the SMB, for the log backups to store. Basically, when I take log backup on Windows Server, it has to access the share folder and copy the log backup there. That's it. I don't want to authenticate. I don't want log backup to authenticate to the share folder. So how are you going to set up the authentication to share folder? Can anybody access it? Yeah, you have to set it up that way. Otherwise, how do you set up the username and password in the log backup to store the log backup in the Samba share, right? So between the Linux servers, yes, there is a way you can set up the credentials to access the share folder, and then you can copy or read the SMB share using the password, the user credentials. But when I'm setting up the log shipping between the Windows server and Linux server, I have hard time, creating the log backup and storing the log backup on SMB share. I don't know how to specify the username and password. All I can say in the log shipping is, okay, this is the share folder. Just go and create the log backup. I don't know how to set up, how to pass the username and password. So I didn't research, but what I found an easy way. Okay, so even though I couldn't change this to share, number one reason. Okay, if I say share, it is giving some syntax errors, or it's saying some weird error messages. Okay, you can set up the share, blah blah blah. I don't know why. Okay, so I just kept it as a user. So is user authentication mode of accessing the SMB shares. Okay, so if it is user, if I need to specify user credentials to authenticate a share, that's not going to work for Windows. I don't know how to set up the Windows to copy. Okay, so in that case, what I did, if Windows access the share folder, then consider that as a bad user, and then forward that bad user as a MSSQL user. That means you're forcing that user as MSSQL, and also guest is also okay, and then access the share folder. Basically bypassing all the security credentials and then store the backups. Okay, when we take log backups on Windows Server, bypass all credentials and then just store the log backup. That's all I wanted. For that, I have to specify if an anonymous user comes, then map that user to MS SQL user. There is MS SQL user on this server. Okay, that's the user that SQL Server service runs on. I got to store the log backup under that user account, not any other user account. So I got to force anonymous user to use MS SQL account and to use that account to store the log backups on the SMB share. And SMB share is on the Linux server. And the log backups will have MS SQL ownership, right? So now when restore job runs, and the restore job runs from what? The SQL server, right? It runs the restore job. So it can use the files because those files are owned by MS SQL. And I said guest equal to okay. So any guest can log in, anonymously log in, and if that login doesn't have any access, then forward that access to MS SQL and create the files. Okay, so I got to do a little bit of tweaking. I did some research how to do this. There are a lot of recommendations on the internet. If you search Google, you will see a lot of people say, so do this, do that. You got to keep trying one by one to see which one you really need. Okay, so this setting, whatever I'm showing you, this setting worked for me. So Windows, I have the log backup on Windows that directly takes a log backup and put the log backup in the Linux server. So you have the share folder on the Linux server. Okay, so this is what it is. So let's save. I have the SMB configuration. And then now, okay, so I got to specify this map to guest equal to bad user. So I forgot to do this, and this has to go under the global. So copy this line. So those are the configuration changes you need to do. Now you need to create the user credentials in the Samba share. The Linux server has user accounts. That is different from the user credentials that you are going to create in the SMB share. If any other Linux server is accessing this SMB share on this server, and it has to use this account, this account to authenticate to the SMB share. You got to create. In this case, I created MS SQL. Don't get confused with this MS SQL with Linux MS SQL. Totally different. You can have any account name here if you want. So for simplicity's sake, this is for MS SQL purposes. I used just MS SQL. So I'm going to set up the credentials for SMB share. So password is again admin123 capital A. Okay, now added the user in the SMB server, not in the Linux server. And you need to restart the Samba services. So have NMB service, you got to restart that. So you have to enable it. So when server rebooted for some reason, it needs to have the SMB share automatically running. So open up the firewall. I guess okay, I have the firewall disabled, so I don't need to open the port because it's already disabled. But if you have any other firewall running internally or externally, you got to open the service for Samba. I need to do one more tweaking for my Linux server. So there is a since this SC Linux, it requires the files to be labeled. For this share, I have to label. That's what the requirement for SC Linux. This step is not there in the Microsoft website. I got stuck here. I couldn't access the SMB share, and then I was researching. Somebody said, okay, you need to set the label for this the share folder. Then when I set this up, it started working. So you need to set the label for the share folder in the SC Linux. It may not be required if you are using SUSE or some other Linux flavor, but I am using CentOS and this is required. So let's set the label, and then you can use the SMB tree now. Now you can see Oh, it's not there. Oh yeah, it's there. You can see that. Okay, yeah, this share is running. Okay, now you can access this share. So you can also see the status of the SMB share, who is connected to what. So it says, oh, we got SMB share, these shares, nobody is connected to any of these shares. Now you can access this share. This share is available. You can access the share from the Windows server. So let's go here. SQL sent OS1. I can access the share, right? Without any username and password, because I said, okay, map the bad user to MS SQL, bypass all the rules, all the credentials, just access the share folder, and let me have access to the share folder, right? So Windows can access the share folder. So now if you go here, and now if you see who is accessing, now it shows. Earlier it was not showing anything. Okay, there are share folders, but nobody is using share folders. I don't see any connections to it. But now you can see 101, the server, the Windows server, it is 101. This 101 is accessing the tlog share folder. Okay, it shows some details here. So who is accessing the tlogs folder? Okay, that way I can say that, oh yeah, this is some computer is accessing my share folder. All right, now we are able to set the share folders. I think we need to give this additional permissions. I researched some other issue, and I found out that, okay, I need to set this as well on the Linux server. So let's execute that. Basically what it says is you need to set some authentication, this user read, write, execute permission on this folder. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So now I can access the share folder, and this information is for Linux client. For example, if you are setting up the log shipping between the Linux servers, and for the secondary Linux server, you need to install the Samba client, and then you have to set some credentials to use, etc., etc. But for the first setup that I was saying earlier, for this setup, Windows server, between the Windows server and Linux server, you don't need this actually. So now we are good to set up the log shipping. Okay, so now I can access a share folder, but this is a share folder on the Linux server. I'm going to set up the log shipping now. So go to properties, and you have the log shipping here. Enable this server as a primary. Click the backup settings. So where you wanted to store the log backups. So this is where I'm going to store the log backups. And log backup compression, you can just leave it as whatever the server default is, because you are setting up native log shipping. So compression or no compression is going to work. Okay, so you created the first. There are three jobs. One is log backup, and then copy job, and then restore job. Now you have configured the log backup job portion. Now you need to say what is the copy job and then restore job is going to be on the secondary server, the target server, right? So you need to add the target server. So what is the target server you are going to set up the other two jobs? SQL CentOS 1, and then you say that, oh, the database on the secondary database server is already initialized. I took a backup manually. I copied that log backup and then restored on the secondary. So I don't want log shipping setup to copy the full, to take a full backup and copy the database. I don't want you to do any of the stuff. I already taken care of it. So that's why I say the secondary database is initialized. And then the copy files. For now, what you can say, you can put some dummy path, because I told you the log backup, it directly stores the log backup on the secondary server. So copy job has nothing to do, because the file is already log backup file. It's already there sitting on the secondary server. So copy job don't need to do copy anywhere, right? I'm going to set up some dummy path here, because I'm going to disable the copy job later. That's why I'm putting some dummy path here. Okay, so the restore, Okay, let's do this because this information, this path is required by the restore job. Okay, restore job is going to take the log backup from this path. Okay, so this is the share folder. I'm going to set like this because copy job may not require this path, but restore job requires that path. So this has to be in no recovery mode or standby mode, whichever. So the target database, how you wanted it to be. You want to read the target database, put it as standby mode. When you're setting up standby mode, the restore job, when log backup job copies the log backup and then restore job restores that log backup. When it restores that log backup, it is going to disconnect the users in the target server and then restore the log backup, and then it will allow you to read the target database. So that's what it is. So when I said OK and then click OK, now it is setting up the log shipping. The log shipping is completed. Now you can see the backup job. So this is that backup job. Okay, the backup job is created on the target server. You have the copy job and then restore job, and then there is a log shipping alert job, and then copy job I'm going to disable it because I already have the file there. It's going to fail even if it runs, or it may succeed, do nothing. So now let's run the backup job. I don't know why this job is there. Probably I might not have cleaned up that. Okay, let's delete this one. Let's run this backup job. Success. So it created the log backup here. Oh, sorry. I guess the share folder is here. This we got to use this path here. All right. Now let's go here. We have the file here, and it has, you can see that 777 because we have opened up everything. So now did restore job ran? No, it never ran because I guess the schedule is to run every 15 minutes by default. So let's run this restore job. Success. So if you see the details of the restore, it says the number of log backups restored 1. Okay, it says restored log backup file is forward slash and then there is a backward slash. Okay, WinDB, this file name is this file name. Okay, so it restored 1 log backup. Now let's take couple of log backups. So we took 2 log backups, and then the log backups are already there. You can see it, and then let's restore. Let's run this job. So this is completed. Now it says number of log backups restored is 2. Okay, so because we took 2 log backups and then restore job, restore the 2 log backups. And I can, it doesn't show restore, or sorry, restoring. Now it shows standby, because when we set up the log shipping, we said I wanted to read the secondary database. So now let's create one table. Now it got that 2 rows here. So that's how you set up the log shipping between the Windows Server and Linux server. Now let's move on to the other setup we talked about, the log shipping between the Linux servers. We have right now this server, the SQL CentOS 1. Okay, so we have the SQL CentOS 1 and we have the SQL CentOS 2. I can show you where it is. It is here. Let's power on. All right, let's configure the secondary server. So now we are going to install the Cfs client. We can give the username and password to access the share folder. So we don't need to bypass all the rules and access the files. So that is what we are going to do now. So we are going to create the credential files. So the credential files, it is going to be under MS SQL. You can put these credentials files anywhere, but these credentials are being used by the SQL server related purposes. So the credentials are stored directly under the MS SQL account inside the folder. You don't need the domain. That's it. So these 2 lines are required. So this server is going to use this credential to access the share folder. Oh, I haven't installed the SQL server on this server. Okay, let's install the SQL server. This is a brand new server and it doesn't have SQL server yet. I think I need to install the SQL server. Let's see if I have the SQL server running. Oh, it doesn't have. All right, so I think we got to go one step back to install the SQL server on the secondary server. So there is an easy way to do it. Just copy the the repository from Microsoft site and then install the SQL server. Just 2 commands. Copy the repository and then install the SQL server. That's it. installing SQL Server is so easy as long as the server has access to internet. Alright, the SQL Server is installed. Let's configure the SQL Server. We need to enable the SQL agent because it is disabled by default. If firewall is running, okay, let's stop the firewall because we don't need the firewall for this demo. Stop the firewall and disable it. Okay, so now we can access the SQL Server on this server without opening up any firewall. Now let's create this credential file again. Now, since we created okay, now we need to create the log folder here. Let's copy these commands. Okay, so now you need to add this line in the FS tab. Basically, what it is doing is it is accessing the share folder and setting up credentials there. Okay, so now I created a mount point for the share folders. Let's go to the since I don't have that in my DNS server, I'm going to use my host file to resolve that name. Otherwise, I have to go to my DNS server and create the DNS entry to resolve that. Okay, so I have the database here. SQL sent to OS2. Let's restart this server because for some reason I guess the CentOS 2 it's picking up 105 IP address. Okay, all right. Now I just restarted the server because for some reason it is the SQL CentOS 2 is still picking up 105 address. I restarted Windows Server to get the correct IP address. The SQL server, the primary database server, Linux server, which is 105 IP address, and the secondary server is 106. Now I'm going to create a database here on the primary server. Let's take backup. All right, now we got the two backups here. So this is the full backup and this is the log backup. I can use SCP utility to copy the backup file. Let's use the SCP utility. I have somewhere the syntax. Yeah, you can use this. So it copied all the Linux databases, sorry, Linux files. We don't need these files. Okay, so let's restore the database. Now let's set up the log shipping between the Linux servers. So my log backup is going to be in this folder. So the share folder. That share folder is being accessed by the Windows machine. We just set up the Logshipping, and now for this setup, for this Logshipping setup, the secondary Linux server SQL CentOS 2 is going to access this share folder. I don't need to initialize because it's already initialized. You can put some path because again the copy job is not going to, I think if it directly access the share folder, then the restore job can directly pick up from the, I guess let's do this, the secondary server, right? Yeah, secondary server, we can set up this. It's done. Now let's okay, I took the backup, and the backup will be here. This is the log backup. Now primary server, this server, sorry, the secondary server, since it is accessing, I have created the mount point directly on the share folder, so it can see the files. You don't need to, the copy job don't need to copy, I guess. Yeah, it can see the files, and then it can read and then restore. So even in this case, I was giving some wrong information. You can just ignore all the stuff. The Linux, sorry, the log shipping between the Linux servers, the copy job, you don't need copy job. The secondary server is directly going to see the share folder and then restore the backup from the share folder. Okay, even in this setup, you don't need this copy job. You can disable it. Okay, because the secondary server, we have used this directory. We have created mount point on this directory to look into the share, sorry, the share folder. Okay, all right. Now let's restore. It restored. Let's see the history. It says number of log backups restored is 1. So it did restore that log backup. So now if I refresh, it should be in standby mode because you can read the. Now let's create some tables. Now you have 3 rows here. So that's how you set up the log shipping between the Linux servers.